Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of College Football Pros. I am your host, Nick Valinchak, and I'm joined, as always, by Drew Van Jura. We are very excited today to have a special guest on the podcast. He is the LSU beat reporter for The Advocate, Ross Dellenger. How are you doing today?
Good. How are y'all?
We're fantastic. We're a day closer to college football. We're a day closer to LSU kicking off against McNeese State. So let's get right into it. When they open up that game at McNeese, or home against McNeese State, who do you think the quarterback's going to be?
Well, yeah, that's the question on everybody's mind. If I had to bet, I would say that Brandon Harris is going to start that game. It just kind of, signs point that way, kind of all fall camp and really throughout the summer. That Brandon Harris is kind of taking the lead there in that job. I don't think it's an automatic thing. I don't think he has this huge, big lead, but I do think he's got enough of one that coaches are going to throw him out there to start the season.
Now, I'm going to go a little bit of a different direction. I'm not going to ask you an easy lob question like Drew. I'm going to really put you on the spot, and I'm going to make you answer a really difficult question right now.
All right. I'm prepared.
How bad do they beat McNeese State?
Yeah, I don't expect it to be real close. I haven't seen a line or anything. I don't think they'd make those the odds yet, or at least they might not make them one at all, actually, because it's separate divisions. I think that's how that works. They don't even make a line. But if they had a line, it'd probably be upwards of 45 points. McNeese is one of the better teams in its own league, and so I think they're probably kind of in the middle of the pack. So, I mean, I'd be surprised if it's any less than 40 points. I think LSU and the coaches, to start the season want to kind of put on a little bit of a show, especially if Brandon Harris is the quarterback. And, last time Brandon Harris played a significant amount of time, it was against a non-conference team in Sam Houston State from another division of football, and he led the offense on 7 straight scoring drives. So I could see something like that happening again.
Yeah, that was kind of like a setup question because obviously, there's no comparison in the level of talent, although McNeese State came close last year with Nebraska, but I think we're talking two different worlds here right now. The reason I kind of set that up is that earlier this month, the Big Ten kind of stepped out and said, you know what, we have to take these games off our schedule. We're not going to allow them to be scheduled. Do you think that the rest, especially within the Power 5 conferences, need to follow suit?
Well, speaking from just a fan of college football, yeah. These are kind of bummer games for the fans, I think, just from speaking with them and being a fan of college football myself. It's going to be usually, 95% of the time it's a blowout in the division, the FBS school's favor. And so every now and then you have a close one. Every few years you have an FCS winner, but it's so rare. And it's just, like I said, it's just kind of bummer, getting ready. This is the LSU season opener. Last year against Wisconsin, they opened with Wisconsin, and it was, throughout the summer, fall camp, you could just feel the excitement of opening up, in Houston against Wisconsin, a big team. That's kind of what you want, for a season opener. So this one, on all these games against these teams from the other division of football is, it's just like I said, it just doesn't have the excitement, and you almost always know what the outcome is. Personally, the SEC probably should go to a non-game SEC schedule and eliminate that one game everybody plays, the FCS opponent.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm like the flag carrier with Power 5 conferences not playing 1AA opponents. But getting back to good football and LSU here, if Brandon Harris is the quarterback, and I'm in the same boat with you, I think he should be a starter. His receivers, Travin Durrell, Malachi Dupree, Trey Quinn. There's a lot of high-profile, high-rated players in the receiving core. What was the problem last year? Why did this team lose 5 games?
Well, mainly the quarterback. Anthony Jennings and he even admitted in the spring he just was not accurate enough, and he just really struggles with accuracy. The short and intermediate passes, it's a thing that he's just not conquered, and it's kind of crazy because he was an Elite 11 quarterback, probably top 10 or so at his position, when he came out of high school, and he throws the deep ball pretty well, but he just, the short and intermediate passing game, this isn't there, and that's really what it came down to. I mean, he just couldn't make the passes, and he had missed throws all over the place. And I think, third, fourth, fifth game of the season, LSU coaches realized it, and they just went to the ground game, and they just pounded, or threw it up deep because he's just not accurate, and that's ultimately, I think, what's cost him that and getting arrested, what's cost him the lead in the quarterback race.
I'm completely on page with you guys there. I think this team, when you look over the quality of talent they have, and then you see that 8-5 record, you kind of squint your eyes a little bit and tilt your head and say, how does this happen? And you're right, passing for 2,100 yards it's just not going to take you where you need to go. No matter how good you can play defensively, if you're not able to score the points, which they evidently weren't able to do, you're not going to go very far. On my end, my favorite player on this team is Leonard Fournette. I don't think I'm alone. Maybe I'm just jumping on the bandwagon with this, but I've loved his potential when he came to school last year. I thought he's capable of doing much more than he did. I think he had a good season. Les Miles seems to kind of dislike, for the most part, giving just one player the opportunity to run with it. So do you think we're going to be stuck in a situation where you're going to see, several guys with over 50 carries and maybe one of them creeping towards 200? Or do you foresee a scenario within this team where Fournette kind of might be let off his leash to do damage?
Yeah, that's one of the big questions around here. I don't think any running back has averaged over 25 carries a game under Les Miles here at LSU. And it's just kind of one of those questions. Is Leonard Fournette become the first? You saw late last season, Leonard Fournette probably could have had 2,000 yards last year rushing, but coaches didn't give him the ball enough the first half of the year. And they basically did what you just mentioned, Les Miles, the running back by committee. And I think Fournette, I did a story, over the spring, I believe Fournette averaged 10 carries a game through the first 6 games of the season. And he averaged 18 carries a game through the last 7 games of the season. And the yardage, like, per carry was about the same. It was like 5.5 yards per carry, 4.5 yards per carry maybe is what it was.
It's 5.5.
Basically 5.5, okay. So he basically doubled the yardage because he got double the carry. So it's not like he really improved necessarily. And I think he did have to find his way in the college game. He was running around people too much, kind of like high school, so he needed to just kind of run more north and south. And he did find his groove a little bit, but plain and simple, coaches just gave him more carries. And they gave him pretty much twice as many carries. And I think this year you're going to see LSU coaches do what they did the latter half of last year, and that's give Leonard Fournette 18, 22, 24 carries a game. You saw against Florida, he had 28, 29, I think, which was kind of a record for under Les Miles. It was like it had been more than a year, I think, since a running back had gotten that many carries in a game. So I think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see if he finishes the year averaging less than 20 carries a game, I will be surprised.
Talk about the other side of the ball real fast. Defensively, you lose, John Chavis to your, a rival school, so that always hurts. And then you lose Jalen Mills, senior leader, for an X amount of time. What is a realistic expectation for this defense this year?
Well, there's certainly a lot of hype, especially around here on the defense. And I see where it's coming from, but at the same time, there are certainly some issues. LSU's depth at defensive line and linebacker. I mean, they're basically one injury or so away at either position group from really being hurt. They have total of 19 scholarship players for those 7 spots. And, half of those 19 probably have never played significant time, maybe more than half. So there's an experience and depth issue at the line, at the linebackers. Defensive backs are the deepest and the most talented position group on the team. That's why Jalen Mills' injury, if you had to look at the glass half full, that's the position group you'd want to lose a starter if you had to, because they are really deep and they are really talented. So this team certainly could be good. I mean, I think the big question, 2 things is they don't need an injury on the line among the linebackers, and especially with the defensive tackles, the 2 starting defensive tackles, Christian Lockacher, Devon Gottschall, and then of course Kendall Beck was a middle linebacker. But any of those 3 guys get hurt, I think that really is going to hurt the defense. So that's one deal. The other one is who emerges as the defensive end. I mean, LSU lost their 2 starting defensive ends last year, and really they didn't produce many sacks last year. 19 sacks, like bottom 10 in the nation. So kind of they need to get a pass rush. Ed Orgeron's kind of infusing that. I think he's trying. And he's trying to find a defensive end to step up. And Arden Key, a freshman, looks like he might be the guy.
Looking at this schedule, I mean, they have a pretty tough road with visiting Mississippi State, Auburn. They have a visit to South Carolina, who does have a little bit up in the air in terms of what exactly they're going to be doing on the offensive side of the ball. They have a game at home, the homecoming game against one of my favorite teams in Western Kentucky, which obviously is a different level of competition, but this team knows how to score points under veteran leadership, maybe the most veteran leadership at the quarterback position in all of college football with Brandon Doughty. They visit Alabama, Arkansas, at Mississippi, Texas A&M. So that's a tough schedule. What does this team have to do to stand a chance at emerging in the SEC West?
Well, there's obviously 2 really big kind of key stretches to their season. Week 2 and week 3 are huge, obviously. So early in the season to have such big games. The travel to Mississippi State, a team with a great quarterback in Dak Prescott, who won 10 games last year, and then they host the next week Auburn team that most people are picking to win the SEC. So that's a really key stretch there. If LSU can get out unscathed and win both of those games, it just after the Auburn game, we'll know a lot about the team. We'll know if they are a contender for a championship, if they're heading back to something like the Music City Bowl, or even worse, if they're headed for maybe the first losing season in 15 years. I mean, you never know. So, if they split those games, maybe it's the middle one of those. If they win them both, maybe they can contend for a championship. If they lose them both, then things could get really messy around here. So you'll know a lot after that. And then, of course, the late season run there, I think you mentioned it there. I mean, I think it starts with Alabama, and it's just brutal down the stretch that last month of the year. So those are 2 stretches that they come out. They can really, you could see it. You could see that they could sure go into Alabama 8-0. They can, they could do that. I mean, it looks tough, but at the same time, the road games, during that stretch aren't terrible. Syracuse, Mississippi State, and South Carolina. I mean those are winnable games, and then everybody else comes into Tiger Stadium, where of course we all know it's really tough to play. So you could see it happening. You could see them going 8-0, but at the same time, you could see them, losing to Auburn and losing to Mississippi State, and maybe losing, to South Carolina or Florida. I mean, so this is a weird season, and it really all depends. Not all, but a lot of it depends on the quarterback. If they get average quarterback play, this team can win 9-10, maybe even more than that with average quarterback play. But like last year, if they get below average quarterback play, it's going to be the same season as last year. 7, 8, 9 wins at the max. So it does. It depends a lot on who's throwing the passes back there behind center.
So at the end of the day, when the smoke settles at the end of the season, in your mind, who are the 4 teams in the college football playoff this year?
Oh, man. I think I just turned in my AP preseason poll, and I'd have to revert to that. I think I have Ohio State number 1, TCU number 2, Auburn number 3. I may have Alabama number 4. That would be tough, obviously, to see Alabama and Auburn both in the playoff. I may have Alabama 5. I don't remember who I have 4. But so I could see, those 3 teams certainly, Alabama or Auburn, Ohio State, and TCU being there.
Well, Ross, we really appreciate your time, and thank you for coming on the podcast. Where can people find you at, and what else are you involved in?
Well, you can go to theadvocate.com for all of our LSU football coverage. We are knee-deep in preseason camp stuff, so and you can also follow us on Twitter at Dellenger ADV.
All right, once again, thank you very much for coming on, and we'll definitely try to hook up with you again once the season is in full swing.
All right, thanks, y'all.
Right. Thanks, Ross.
Moving right along today, Drew, it is time to cover the final Power 5 conference we have to cover in this preseason, which means we are getting dangerously close. The smell is in the air to the kickoff of college football. We have to cover the ACC. And how do you feel about the ACC this year, Drew?
I think the ACC is a conference that, like the Big 12 last year, I think if there's not a team that's undefeated and that's, really the media darling and all this stuff, they get left out. I do feel that because you look top to bottom, Florida State, Georgia Tech, probably the 2 strongest teams, followed by Clemson, maybe Pitt if they can get Tyler Boyd back healthy. I don't know. We will talk about this in depth more as we go on. But I think they're going to need 2 to possibly 3 teams to really be ranked and compete this year, especially out of conference. They have to win their out of conference games. We talked about this a couple years ago, the Big Ten, and how they just got embarrassed in the non-conference. So leading into the bowl season, people were like, okay, they're not that good, yada, yada. Boom, the Big Ten not only wins the national championship last year, but they pretty much dominated in their bowl games. So I think the ACC is looking straight down the barrel of what the Big 12 did last year.
Yeah, I think it was interesting. We were, you were talking about the Big 10, not the Big 12, right?
Yeah.
What were you talking about? Yeah. So we were just talking about this at dinner for whatever reason. I don't know how conversation spiraled. I think I was talking about one of the fantasy sites came out with their games, and it had all of the basically all of the Thursday and Friday games, which, if you know where I'm going with this, means you get, Team A versus New Hampshire, Team B versus Alcorn State. And I'm just like, I really hate seeing that, because it just clutters up the player pool. But then I'm like, at the same time, though, people are going to buy into that, oh, look at this awful team they're facing. And we've discussed this at ends before. Like, you just don't know. Just because it's a bad team like that, especially when it's in a lower class of football, you don't know how long the star players are going to play, so it makes it really dangerous. And we just ended up segueing, and basically you just brought up the exact point that I made to her, that like nobody was on the Big Ten until they win the national championship and have a very strong postseason. I think the problem with that lies that was just an isolated incident. We don't even have to go back a calendar year before that, where Clemson was smacking the Ohio State Buckeyes around on the field pretty much at their hit their whim. So I think that we're not here to talk about the Big Ten, but they have a lot to prove. This is an integral year for that conference too, because you don't want to be a conference that's just one and done, where you have one good year and fall back into mediocrity, which is basically where a lot of the analysts kind of put them. We've talked to a lot of people that, kind of said that coming into last year, that's what they thought the weakest conference was.
Absolutely.
So, and just what you're saying about the ACC, I mean, they're in the same position too, where they've had the luxury of having a superstar like Jameis Winston at the forefront of the conference, and he's not there. And there's a lot of talented players here, but none of them really carry that bigger than football personality that Winston has. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, they lost a lot of star power last year. I mean, obviously with Winston, but Taj Boyd, Sammy Watkins a couple years ago. Pitt has Tyler Boyd and James Conner. Boyd has legal issues, and Conner isn't really the face of any college football magazine. You know what I mean? Like, he's not there yet. Miami doesn't have anybody. Duke doesn't have anybody. BC. So, I mean, yeah, there's not a lot of star power, but I agree with what you said. There's a lot of talent, just not a lot of star power.
I think that's part of what it comes down to. And again, going back to the amount of people we've talked to, one of the recurring themes we get is that, it was not necessarily just a football decision that put Ohio State into that national championship. There was a lot of, there was a lot of related factors that pushed them there. They were obviously a much bigger program. They knew that in terms of draw, Ohio State sounds better than Baylor and TCU because as a whole, college football fans don't typically go by one season of, success to push someone up to that huge level where they're just over the top. So that's part of what I think we found out is that there's more to it than that. And I think, kind of piggybacking off what you were saying, at the end of the year, we could find a team that I like. Let's just use a team I like in Clemson. I do think their defense is going to lose enough that it kind of makes them a little more susceptible than they were last year. But let's just say at the end of the season, they're an 11-1 football team. They don't have Deshaun Watson is a great football player, but he doesn't have the revenue earning potential of a Jameis Winston, and that keeps a Clemson team that might be even with an Alabama, or even better than an Alabama. There could be a situation where it's a 2-loss SEC team getting in before a 1-loss ACC team. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think. See, again, it all goes back to the conference as a whole needs to be strong, like the Big Ten, like the SEC. And your point is exactly right. That if we're coming in here with, say, an Alabama with 2 losses, and say they lost to Auburn and somebody out of conference, some ungodly reason, whatever it might be, and say Clemson came in here and lost to last place Syracuse team in their side, whatever it might be. I mean, I'm taking an SEC team. And I'm an ACC guy. Everybody knows if they listen to this podcast, I'm a huge Canes fan. But at the end of the day, this conference needs more than 1 to 2 teams to be in the top 25. And right now, I don't see it. I mean, maybe preseason, depending on the poll you look at, they may have a couple teams in there. But, perception is reality. We've talked about this in the past. And right now, the perception of the ACC is very, very bad.
No disagreement here. I'm just kind of scanning through and looking. If I had to guess, top 25 at the beginning of the year, I think you definitely see Florida State in there. I think you definitely see Clemson in there. Then I have several question marks. What do you think about teams like Louisville, like Georgia Tech, like North Carolina State? I mean, I think those teams could all be fringe top 25 potential teams. Is there anything that sticks out at you that says no, none of them would be, or one of them could be, the others wouldn't?
No, but again, what we're saying, like, if they're fringe top 25 teams and they're all just mediocre, like, again, they may be good teams, and Georgia Tech is a good team. Duke is an up-and-coming team. Coach Cutcliffe has that team on the uptick. Virginia Tech, Louisville, NC State. Everybody's high on NC State this year. So, yeah, there's a lot of teams that have the potential, but at the end of the day, it's just not there. It's star power, and like you said, star power not there, as these other conferences have a ton of quarterbacks coming back, a ton of running backs, whatever it might be. They've got that star power, the face of football. ACC doesn't have that this year.
Yeah, and if you compare them like we just got finished doing with the SEC, I mean, the SEC West has, 6 legitimate top 25 potential teams?
Yeah.
That's probably as much as the entire ACC. Now, granted, that's probably more than any other conference, but still, the point is there. It's that I think there's this gap between talents. I look for somebody to really step out this year in terms of becoming the face. It could be a Deshaun Watson. It could be a James Conner. I think Conner possibly has the best position to do that just because of what he's working with. Obviously, I think there's a general favoritism towards quarterbacks. But nonetheless, I do think this is going to be an exciting conference. And, why don't we start on the Atlantic side and look at some of these teams? Let's start with Boston College. the 5th worst passing offense last year, the 15th ranked rushing offense, the 83rd overall offense, the 68th passing defense, the 2nd ranked rushing defense for an 11th ranking on the overall defense, 26.2 points scored, 21.3 allowed. What's your take on this Boston College team in 2015?
They have some serious offensive issues. Coach Steve Adazio has got to figure out the quarterback position. Is it Darius Wade? Is it Troy Flutie? I don't know. I mean, the Flutie name in Boston College is synonymous, and he did one thing in college football, and everybody thinks he's the greatest quarterback ever. Whatever the case might be. Running back wise, though, is not an issue. John Hillman, fantastic. However, if you have 11 guys in the box, as we talked about from some of these teams, you got to do something else other than run the ball. In this team, I don't see that happening.
Well, let's also look at the fact that you stack 11 men in the box with an offensive line that's replacing all 5 starters.
Yeah, also not good.
Yeah, it really does spell a difficult position, and this team really hasn't tried to, set up the pass. They've been predicated on the run. Hillman, I think, is still stands to have a very solid year. But I definitely think that 1,500 to 1,700 yards of production through the air, it just isn't enough to differentiate your offense. You have to try. I think this team has to do a little more. They're a little too one-dimensional. Like we've talked at length about a lot of the triple option teams, and what they do is bring something completely different to the table than what's happening here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this team, they're going to line up in the I formation in the shotgun, and they're just going to give the ball to the running back one.
It's predictability. I mean, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah, because there's literally no receivers that stand out to me. Sherman Alston, maybe for me, is a guy that has really I've heard good things about. I don't know. But again, if there's nobody to throw him the ball, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and I look at the defense, which I think. I think it is possibly set up to take a little bit of a step back. The D-line does return 8 of their top 9. The linebackers are about where they were at last year. So there's a case that says that the front 7 should be on par with talent. They finished 2nd in the nation. And when you're finishing that high, unless you're an absolute elite defense, I think there's going to be some flexibility. It's going to be really hard to keep that number 2 spot. The defensive backs lose quite a bit, and that's where this team was able to be stung anyway last year. So, I mean, it's pretty clear that that's going to be the way to move the ball against them. I just don't think that they're really set up, especially if their defense looks like it's more likely to give up more points and maybe move into that 24 points allowed, maybe even 25 points allowed range, and you're only scoring 26.2 points, there should be a gigantic red flag coming up.
Yeah, their defense has got to figure it out. The interesting stat, they only forced 2 fumbles last year. I mean, wouldn't you think you would accidentally force a couple?
Especially when you're talking about being the 11th ranked defense overall, you would think that the turnovers would be kind of attached with that. It should just be synonymous with one another.
Yeah, and their turnover margin was only +1, and that was 57th in the nation. So, I mean, it's a very odd stat when you only have 2 forced fumbles, and you actually still have a plus turnover margin. So that's a good thing. However, defensively, they have a lot of junior and senior leadership, a lot of upperclassmen, a lot of experience. But as we've said numerous times, if they're on the field 75% of the game, you're going to get tired and you're going to give up points.
Is there anybody on this team other than John Hillman that really jumps out at you?
Not at all. I mean, hopefully at the end of the season we're talking about Darius Wade because I think he has a potential, but no, I really don't.
No disagreements from me, and moving along, we'll go to the team that I'm the highest on, and that's Clemson. In 2014, they had the 39th ranked passing offense, the 91st ranked rushing offense, the 61st ranked overall offense, the 2nd ranked passing defense, the 5th ranked rushing defense, and they were the best defense overall in the country. They scored 30.8 points, and they gave up the 3rd least points at 16.7. What does this Clemson team have to do this year to kind of take that next step now that it looks like Florida State may be susceptible?
Their defense lost a ton last year. the co-defensive coordinator, Brent Venables, is a great-minded, genius defensive guy, but he has got to figure it out on defense. I'm looking at the projected starters. They've got a ton of upperclassmen, but my question, they're upperclassmen that really haven't had a lot of experience because the people that have been there in the past couple of seasons have been so good, and the defensive stats show that. So if these guys can step in, and I do think they do. I think early in the season, the schedule sets up very nicely for them with their first 2 games, home against Wofford and home against Appalachian State. Then you travel to Louisville, which will be the first test of this team. So I think the first 2 games of the season, this defense is going to settle in nicely. And if they can do 85% of what that defense did the past couple of seasons, this team has the potential to be a Final Four contender because of the play of Deshaun Watson, who I think is going to be – I'm completely on board with you. I think this kid is going to take that next step, and he is going to be, at the end of the season, somebody we're talking about as the face of college football moving into next year.
2 things I'd piggyback off. Looking at their defense, the D-line returns 7 starts. So 7 starts.
That'd be weird.
Combined. Yeah, they have 7. That's why they're so good, right? They've got extra players on the field. You know, that to me spells difficulty. I think the benefit there ends up being in that you end up with a good defensive coordinator who's known for being able to put together a strong defense, but, you know, expectations are kind of tempered until I see it work out. Number 2, Deshaun Watson is as dynamic as any quarterback that we know in college football. I think we're all in agreement, and there's basically very few people who have seen him play that are going to, you know, say anything to the contrary on that. But with him, the biggest problem is the injuries, man. If he can keep healthy, you know, you could be looking at a situation similar to what Trayvon Boykin had at TCU last year. I don't think the running game sets up as nicely as it did in TCU with Catalon and Green. Wayne Gallman is still a very good running back. They just don't use him the same way. But Mike Williams, Artavis Scott, not only are they both immensely talented, but they're 2 entirely different receivers altogether, and I think that's what really makes this team so special.
Yeah, I agree. And how many times has the name Mike Williams been associated with the receiving position? I feel like if your child is named Mike Williams, he's bound to be a really good receiver.
Yeah.
I'm just off the top of my head, I could think of like 3 or 4 guys that have come out in the past 10 years that have been Mike Williams that have been really good. So it's a fun little side note there. But yeah, I agree. I mean, these receiving core with the addition of Deshaun Watson, they've got to get better. And from all that I've read, all that I've seen, this team is getting better, and they are taking the next step. So we'll see if Dabo Swinney can put it all together and have a Final Four type season.
I have a little more research to do until I feel comfortable, you know, calling my Final Four. Yeah. They're right there for me. Like, I know in the back of my mind, I'm sitting with Clemson. I've got Auburn, Alabama, LSU, Ohio State, TCU, USC, potentially State. Like, I've got a lot of teams in my head. I just have to kind of sit down and see how the schedules pan out. But, man, I think they're right there. And, you know, if Watson is able to stay healthy, this team is really going to put on a show, I think, in 2015.
I agree. I think, however, on the flip side of that, I think if they don't gel and if Watson isn't what we think he is, this team probably misses a bowl game.
I mean, there's merit to that thought. I think that I haven't heard anything that makes me feel uncomfortable about Watson. So for the most part, I'm kind of like holding solid and saying, all right, this should go well. But you never know. There's been plenty of times where a guy has looked great one year, had an injury, and came back out and was just never the same.
Absolutely. So I hope the best for this team because, like we've said, for the ACC to make any noise, and if it is Clemson, they're going to need help.
Speaking of a team that's going to have an entirely different look in 2015, the Florida State Seminoles finished 2014 ranked 14th in passing offense, 98th in rushing offense, 38th in overall offense, 60th ranked passing defense, the 73rd ranked rushing defense, the 63rd overall defense. They scored 33.7 points. They allowed 25.6. This is definitely a team that's a little bit in flux when you have a star player like Jameis Winston, Rashard Green, Carlos Williams, Nick Leary. That is a lot to lose all in one season.
Yeah, and then you also throw in the loss of Dalvin Cook.
Has his status been like?
No,
is it
because
still
this is
murky or
bullshit.
what?
This is bullshit, and we can censor the hell out of that. It doesn't matter because his court date and his hearing is, when we're recording this, it's next week, but it's the 24th or somewhere around there because I've heard rumors that it might get changed again. Mm-hmm. That's complete BS to me because whatever he did, okay, and I don't care what it is. I don't care who does what in the justice system in America has got to figure it out that this kid has been sitting on the sideline and has been up in the air and in flux for months now. Why has it taken this long? Is my question. That's complete BS to me. And I don't care the player. I don't care the position. Why does it take this long?
Well, we have it like an impotent judicial system is the problem.
Oh, the justice system in America is broke.
There's no like just this is the punishment for this. It's all based on extenuating circumstances that the type of extenuating circumstances that shouldn't be extenuating circumstances in terms of a decision. Yeah. The fact that somebody is an athlete should not aid them in the type of penalties they get. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. I don't care if you're an athlete or a non-athlete. Whatever the punishment is, the punishment is. And it's we've seen it with Jameis Winston. Okay? Right. I mean, the rape accusations, and they were accusations, and they were found untrue. So we have to say that. But at the end of the day, come on, man. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Yeah, and I'm hoping he takes that situation and kind of learns from it. And you know, I'm giving him the benefit of the doubt, and I'm going to say that it's probably not true. There's a lot of different reasons why it could have been found untrue. Let's just be honest. Money exchanges hands. You know, there's a lot of different reasons, but ultimately, I think the biggest thing that a young person needs to take from a situation like that is many times it can just be the type of person you put yourself around. You know, it's not just, the type of actions that you yourself do, but if you're putting yourself around people who aren't doing the right things, it can come back and haunt you.
Absolutely, and hopefully he's turned it around in the pros, and hopefully he's doing better. And it's this Florida State team as a whole. It's Dalvin Cook. It's everybody. Maurice Claret from the Youngstown area just went down to Florida State the other day and literally told these guys, grow up. You're in major college football. You have the world at your fingertips. Take my example. Take what Mo did. Learn from it.
Not just that. Let's not forget it wasn't too long that DeAndre Johnson, that was his name, right?
Yeah, the quarterback.
Got in the bar fight, and now he's at a JUCO. This team definitely has some behavioral issues. It kind of makes you wonder what Jimbo Fisher's doing down there.
Yeah, it is.
Or not doing.
Right, and to kind of put that in perspective, the 1980s Miami teams were coached by Jimmy Johnson, who we know went on to coach the Cowboys to many Super Bowls. A player from Miami once said, two things happen on the field. What Jimmy Johnson wants us to do and what Jimmy Johnson allows us to do. Now, if anybody knows anything about 1980s Miami football teams, Renegades, bad dudes, swagger, they were bad dudes. And that's a good compliment, because if anybody listening to this doesn't know anything about 80s Miami football, go Google it, because they were some bad dudes on and off the field. They were legit people. But at the end of the day, it's what the coach allows them to do. Jimmy Johnson had so much respect from his players that if Jimmy looked at a player a certain way, the player knew either A, stop doing what you're doing, or B, start doing what Jimmy wants you to do. And Jimbo does not have that respect.
Well, it's going to have to be installed, and it's at a pivotal point this year because they're sitting in a position where they've got to decide, do they stick with someone like Sean McGuire, who filled in reasonably well for Winston when he was unable to play last year, who knows the offense, who has the camaraderie with the team, or do they take a shot with Everett Golson, who left Notre Dame because overall he just wasn't, he'd kind of hit a wall And the coach there just kind of said, listen, we're not going to just let you back up and continue to run into a wall. We're going to go a different direction with someone else. I think that's going to really, have they actually come out and said yet, Guy A is our starter?
Jimbo said probably game week.
Yeah.
And who do you start? If you had to pick, who would you start?
That's really tough.
You have to pick.
If I picked, I would probably start Sean McGuire.
Yeah, I would say the same thing.
I would just say that because, there's two schools of thought I could see being in play. On one hand, you want to put the best guys on the field that you can, talent-wise. I think Everett Golson offers a skill set that is different than McGuire, that has been proven to be, it can win games. Let's just put it that way. But at the same time, McGuire is the best decision for the team as a whole because of his grasp of the offense. Presumably, I mean, we've only seen him in limited action. I've heard good things in the offseason, so that would be my defensibility. Ultimately, this is a team that's in a little bit of kind of a transitional year. I like Travis Rudolph and Jesus Wilson. Is it Jesus or Jesus?
I honestly don't know the answer to that question. I'm going to say Jesus because we're seeing Major League, the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jesus.
I thought I heard them call him Jesus Wilson.
Could be.
But
I don't know.
Anyway, I don't remember. I don't want to. We butcher people's names enough. I just don't want to continue to do it. If Dalvin Cook isn't in the picture, Mario Pender's a good replacement. But I just don't like teams that have so much going on off the field that it makes it tough to concentrate on them on the field.
Yeah, so many distractions, and I do feel bad for the guys that are doing everything by the book and that are going to class and that are trying to get an education plus play football, because those are the guys ultimately that get hurt. So I don't know. I hope the best for this team, but the 13 wins of last season are going to be long gone because honestly, if you want my honest opinion, I think this team, looking at their schedule, their out-of-conference games are very, very easy. That's not a question. I could see this team winning 7-8 games, and for a Florida State team that's been in the national title picture the past couple years, that's going to be a huge reality check for this fan base.
Moving along, let's go to Louisville, who in 2014 had the 47th ranked passing offense, the 95th ranked rushing offense, the 72nd ranked overall offense, the 27th ranked passing defense, the 10th ranked rushing defense, the 6th ranked overall defense. They scored 31.2 points. They allowed 21.8. I think, with the exception of Devontae Parker leaving, I feel like they're in a pretty good position in 2015. What do you think?
A lot of unproven commodities on this offense and the defense. The defense lost a ton of production. But yeah, if this offense can gel and if this offense can take that next step, I think they have the potency, under Bobby Petrino, his second stint at the school. I really think this team has potential, but they have to replace so much production and so much experience. I think it's going to be kind of a tough year, and by that I mean I think they still go bowling, but I think it's going to be a struggle, And this is what we're talking about with the ACC. Like, we love that Louisville has a ton of potential. Who's their quarterback? Who's the running back? Who's the other receiver going to be? So I mean, when you look at the automatic, flashy positions and the star positions, you go unproven commodities, a lot of talent, but just unproven.
Will Gardner, Brandon Radcliffe, and James Quick. I just answered your questions, that's all.
Who would you say the quarterback's going to be?
Will Gardner.
Wow. Not going to lie, he's not even on my list.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think they're in a good position, I think, in that area, having Bolin, having Bonifin. I think they've got some good choices there. Dyer was a good running back. I think that Radcliffe could do just fine. I think the biggest issue is on the offense is definitely the receiving end, because you just don't know exactly where the production's going to come from. The defense, like you said, there's some losses there. They bring in some good transfers. Devontae Fields from TCU was the Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year in 2013, I believe. They're bringing in some high talented transfers from Georgia of a defensive back, so I think that's a good thing. I'm not in love with this team. I think this team fits the profile of someone who could play spoiler but isn't going to be considered. I don't think they're in the running for a playoff.
Right, and I'm actually just reading Coach Petrino's thoughts on the quarterback position, and he said he is in no hurry to make a quarterback decision. All 4 guys, including true freshman Lamar Jackson, are in an open competition right now, and he has no idea who's going to start week 1.
Well, Petrino doesn't have to make the decision. I already said it was Will Gardner. I mean, he can move on. He could figure out other things, and he could just, play Will Gardner.
I like Kyle Bolin, to be honest with you. I have him projected as a starter.
So that means, without a doubt, that Reggie Bonnafin will be starting for this team in 2016.
Hands down. Mark it down.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, I mean, this team, I'm on the same page as you. I think they have the upside to possibly win this conference, but that's not saying much. You know what I mean?
If they win it, it's going to be that the conference will have been ugly.
That's my exact point. So, again, I think this team goes bowling, but I think they might have to fight for it this year.
NC State, 2014, the 84th ranked passing offense, the 39th ranked rushing offense, the 60th ranked overall offense, the 31st ranked rushing defense, the 31st ranked passing defense, 67th ranked rushing defense, 47th ranked overall defense. They scored 30.2 points. They allowed 27. Surprisingly, this is one of my favorite teams from last year. Did you know that?
I kind of knew that because I think they really helped you in a daily fantasy.
They did. Jacoby Brissett really kind of came into his own last year. He had a 23-5 touchdown to interception ratio, which I think in that offense is beautiful. Completion percentage, a hair under 60%. I think if he improves on that this year, this offense might not skip a beat. The leading receiver, Bo Hines, who was kind of like his safety valve, is gone, but Braylon Cherry and their tight end, David Greenidge, return, and they've got 2 guys in the backfield in Shadrack Thornton and Matt Days that can both really get it done running the ball and catching the ball. I think from a real-life perspective and a daily fantasy perspective, there is a lot to like on this team.
And, everybody in the mainstream media is high on this team, and I'll tell you what, I am too. I think the meter is definitely on the upswing. Jacoby Brissett, former highly ranked recruit coming out of high school, a lot of talent, transferred out of Florida a couple years ago, landed at NC State, and has done extremely well in this offense. I love Shadrack Thornton in the backfield. I think this kid is going to have a breakout year where he's been kind of overshadowed by some guys. And I'm going to tell you, name it receiver. This kid's a true freshman receiver. I'm going to butcher his name, and I apologize.
Johnny Dixon.
Yeah, exactly. Naheem Hines. He's a true freshman. This kid has been fantastic in high school, and he's a slash type guy. He could be a running back, a receiver, great hands, good route runner. I think he's the guy at the end of the season that might even be the number 1 receiver on this team. So I'm excited for this team. But again, they have to have help. This team has the potential. I mean, very honest, if you look at their schedule, Troy, Eastern Kentucky, at Old Dominion, at South Florida to open the season. They're going to start 4-0. They're going to have a ton of momentum, and they're going to have a ton of hype around this team heading in at home against Louisville, who we just talked about that may struggle on defense a little bit. This schedule sets up very nicely for them in down the stretch. So I don't know. I'm excited for this team, but we'll see.
The defense returns a lot. 6 of 10 on the D line, 4 of 6 linebackers. Defensive backs return 84 starts. I think this team could take a jump in the top 40. And, if they can peel down the number of points allowed, 27 isn't horrible. If they could get that down to 25, I have confidence that they can score 32, 34 points a game. You could be really looking at an interesting situation where come, the last few weeks of the season, you're going to be saying, can this team, actually win the ACC?
Yeah, exactly. And I think to illustrate that point, what you just said about the defensive scoring going down, they gave up 56 to Florida State last year. Obviously, that team is going to look starkly different.
Do you remember that game? That game,
I do.
I think that was the first nail biter that Florida State had. I could be wrong on that, but I remember that being a highly competitive game.
They also gave up 41 to Clemson. So right then and there, you take pretty much those points and cut it in half because the offensive production from those schools won't be there, and the defensive production from NC State I feel gets better. Not a ton better, but gets better. So I think this team is, at the end of the year, I think we're sitting here going, man, NC State's in the ACC title game, and they got a shot to go to the one of the whatever bowl is, because isn't the Orange Bowl in the rotation this year for the playoff?
I think so.
isn't it sugar and orange? I don't know.
I don't know either, to be honest.
So whatever the case, then now the ACC champion goes to the Cotton, I think. I don't know.
Yeah.
We could have a podcast on breaking down the college football playoff and rotation.
Yeah, that sounds spectacular. Let's just
That'll get a lot of views.
Soon. Yeah. Well, next year it's going to be the Rose Bowl, and we.
No, I mean it's so confusing because then you have, if your conference champion affiliate bowl game is in the rotation, you go to a secondary bowl rotation game, but
right.
You can only go once in 10 years, and if Notre Dame's in there, it gets all messed up. So, yeah, it's weekend. Anyhow, moving on to Syracuse.
Moving on to Syracuse, another team that's in a really difficult position. 105th ranked passing offense, the 93rd ranked rushing offense, the 116th ranked overall offense, the 39th ranked passing defense, the 31st ranked rushing defense, the 27th ranked overall defense, the 8th fewest points scored last year, 17.1 per game. They allowed 24.3. Just see a lot of question marks when I look at this offense.
Yeah, this team, I don't have any idea. I mean, this is a team, like we talk about other conferences, where this team is just going to struggle at the bottom of the conference, and they are. They won one ACC game last year, and they beat Wake Forest, and they actually beat them pretty bad, 30-7.
And so to be completely, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying that might be their only win again this year.
Yeah, looking at this offense, the only person that jumps out to me, hopefully, is Terrell Hunt. He's talented. He and AJ Long went a combined 5 to 12s in terms of touchdown to interception, combining for about a 55% completion percentage. Not happening. I mean, we've already illustrated that there are some fairly strong defenses, and Syracuse is one as well. But you can't. That type of production is not going to get it done. You lose both of your running backs, although they combined for 2 rushing touchdowns last year. They combined for 2 rushing touchdowns. That means you add one guy's total to the other guy's total, and it was 2 touchdowns.
So that means, by theory of math and
they
science,
actually scored 1 each.
They scored 1 each, yeah. I mean, that's sad. I mean, this team is going to struggle all the way around, so I don't know. There's nothing that really stands out, offense or defense. They have to replace 8 starters on defense, and to a defense that gave up a ton of points, that doesn't. And I'm looking at the projected starters, and they're a ton of underclassmen. So,
speaking of another team that doesn't jump out at all, who do you think we're going to talk about next?
I'm going to say it's the team that just lost to Syracuse last season. So let's go to Wake Forest.
109th ranked passing offense, the 2nd worst rushing offense. They were the worst offense in college football. The 12th ranked passing defense, the 83rd ranked rushing defense, the 41st ranked overall defense. They scored the 2nd least points in the country at 14.8. They allowed 26.4. What a train wreck this team was. I'm sure we're going to get some really great feedback from their fans. We have several fans that get really irritated with us when we tell the truth about their teams.
So that must mean we're doing something right, correct?
But, I mean come on.
Tweets.
Not only is your tight end the best player on your team, he is the best player on your offense by a long shot.
Yeah. I don't have any clue where this team's getting production from. They won 3 games last year. They won 1 in the ACC, and they beat Virginia Tech 6-3 in overtime. That was a barn burner of a game. I remember that game, actually. Yeah, struggle.
I mean,
that's all you can say, honestly. There's nobody that stands out.
Nope. 7 offensive linemen returned, but they're just not that good. I mean, they have to. It's going to have to start in recruiting. They're going to have to start to recruit better. John Wolford at quarterback just doesn't inspire any kind of confidence for me. I think that you're in a position where you have the worst offense in college football. I don't know that 2 years in a row that they're going to sit in that same position, but they're not going to be. I don't see them being very competitive.
Yeah, a fun little story about Wake Forest. Every year we go down to Myrtle Beach, as we talked about before in a podcast, and the one year we stopped down in Winston-Salem, where Wake Forest is, and we were like, you know what, let's just go on campus, see what's going on. We went to the football facility. Not only did we walk on the field like it was wide open, but we walked in the locker room, and I was wearing my Miami, gear representing, and I actually took many pictures throwing up the U in the middle of the Wake Forest locker room because it was so protected, and not one person cared we were in there.
Wow, that's amazing. If any Wake Forest fans want to try to rip your jugular out for that, where can they find you, Drew?
They can always find me at CFP Bros. Drew, where can they find you?
On Twitter at CFB Pros, on Facebook, College Football Pros, online, www.cfbpros.com. Join us tomorrow when we finish up the ACC.